Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Ariel was going home in tears. The rain was pouring down, soaking her to the bone. The elegant dress she had worn for the special occasion clung to her body. Her hair hung in damp strands alongside her face. Ariel didn't even think about seeking shelter. On the contrary, it was better this way, so her tears weren't visible as they mingled with the raindrops. Olivio, how could he? She remembered his eyes, the shy glances he carefully hid from her. The man Ariel had long considered the bravest, most reliable, and loving, seemed to be hiding behind his silent father's back. But the family's mother didn't hold back on expressions. She had a lot to say that evening. She was about to arrive at the destination. The outlines of a large mall in the distance were becoming visible, just a 2-minute walk from home. Ariel had reached it from the city center in about half an hour. Waiting for a bus would have taken longer, that's for sure. It's amazing what stress can do to people. Ariel hadn't even realized she had walked about 10 to 12 kilometers. Ariel stopped. No, she couldn't go home in this state. Her mom would start asking questions, worrying, getting anxious, and it wasn't good for her, even dangerous. Mom. Somewhere in the stomach, Ariel felt an unpleasant cold knot. Her mother had a very bad heart, and as she aged, the condition worsened, especially recently. Her mother needed to avoid unnecessary stress, so Ariel decided to head to the shopping center, dry off a bit, have a cup of coffee at the food court, sit down, gather herself, and then put on one of her usual warm smiles before facing her mother. Ariel had been protecting her mother since childhood. Many times, she had witnessed her mother's episodes. Sometimes her mother was even taken to the hospital, and young Ariel was left alone for several days or even weeks. Under the watchful eye of neighbors, of course, but still. Ariel had no other relatives who could look after her. They were alone in the world. Ariel had once overheard her mother talking to a friend, saying that she had been advised not to have a child at all. Later, Ariel asked her mother about it, and at first, her mother tried to deny it, attempting to convince her otherwise. But eventually, she confessed. Yes, they told me, she said, they warned me. But their predictions were wrong. They didn't believe I could carry you to term. They predicted I'll die by mid-pregnancy. And how did you decide to go on? Ariel inquired. Well, I thought, what's the point of living if I won't have you? You were already with me, living in my heart. How could I get rid of you? No, it was the right decision in my life. Ariel sometimes felt guilty because her mother was in this condition because of her. But her mother, noticing this, would get angry with her. Don't think about that. I wanted a child very much. How could you influence my decision? Think about it. I wanted a daughter just like you, and I'm happy I went against all the predictions. And, by the way, I was right. Yes, my heart is in a bad condition. What guarantee is there that it wouldn't have happened without childbirth? After all, it's been weeks since childhood. And the doctors initially said I would die during pregnancy. Then they predicted I wouldn't survive childbirth. Then they assured me that my child would end up in an orphanage at the age of 2 or 3. What do we have in reality? Ariel's mother often told Ariel that her daughter was the most precious gift life had given her, that having such a wonderful child was an immense joy. Sometimes, she also talked about Ariel's father, and Ariel understood that her mother loved him very much, even though she knew very little about him. They had met by chance, bumping into each other on a bridge in a big city. The handsome young man had come for a student conference, while Ariel's mother, who was then just Ariel's future mother, of course, was taking her first ever vacation. She had recently graduated from college and had landed a job as a seamstress at a tailor's shop, making a decent living for the time. She had saved up for a year to go on this trip. The young people immediately liked each other. They spent a long time walking together through picturesque streets and sitting in cafes. The student turned out to be such an intelligent and interesting person that the young girl listened to him with bated breath. Later that evening, they went to his hotel room. Both of them thought it was just the beginning of their relationship, but fate had other plans. They agreed to meet at a monument at noon the next day, after the student's semester ended. But the young girl never saw her beloved again. At first, she thought the student had deceived her. But how? He had looked at her with admiration, held her hands tenderly. No, that didn't seem true. Eyes couldn't lie. So, the young girl went to the hotel where the young man was staying. There, she learned that the students had been urgently called for some military training or something similar. So he just couldn't come to her, couldn't get away. That's how we lost each other, Ariel's mother sighed with a sad smile, telling her daughter this story. There were no social networks back then, so finding each other in the vast country turned out to be impossible. We hadn't even exchanged addresses. I searched for him, tried to find information about his city or university in that hotel. They refused. The information was confidential, after all. Surely, he must have tried to find me as well. At least I still have you. And how could I give up such happiness? Ariel settled at a table hidden behind a column. She didn't want people to look at her right now. They flowed through the upper floor of the shopping center in an endless stream. Among them there were couples in love. Young people hugged, smiled at each other, just like her and Olivia had not long ago. Happy. But, of course, there was no guarantee that this happiness would last long, no guarantee at all. A cheerful waiter brought Ariel her coffee and wished her a good day, looking friendly on the surface but indifferent underneath. He didn't really care how Ariel's day would be, it was just his job. The only person in the world who wasn't indifferent to Ariel was her mother. Her health was deteriorating. Until this evening, Ariel had hoped that Olivia loved her too. He had told her so many times. He must have been lying. Ariel took a sip of the hot, aromatic beverage with pleasure, and the blissful warmth spread throughout her body, making her feel a little lighter. Maybe it wasn't so bad that Olivia had revealed his true self today. It would have been much worse if their relationship had gone further, become more serious, and then he showed his true colors. Although how much more serious could it have gotten? Ariel had thought he was about to propose, otherwise, why would he invite her to meet his parents? That was a sign of serious intentions. Ariel had recently graduated from college. She had become a seamstress, just like her mother. She had loved this craft since her early years. Even as a little girl, she used to dress her numerous dolls. She enjoyed creating interesting designs, selecting materials, and the process itself brought her joy. It was truly a wonderful thing. There was a piece of fabric, or maybe several pieces, and before you knew it, that shapeless something turned into a beautiful dress that could make any doll into a princess. Ariel's mother worked a lot, so the girl often found herself alone at home, left on her own. But she never got bored. Sewing both distracted and entertained her, giving her pleasure. When her mother came home from work, she sincerely admired her daughter's creations and even took Ariel's many masterpieces to her own tailoring studio to show her colleagues. But Ariel never became a fashion designer, of course. After finishing school, she attended college and pursued a career as a seamstress. Now she worked at a tailor's shop not far from home. She enjoyed her work, and she had a knack for it. Her superiors praised the young and enthusiastic employee. Nobody could adjust outfits to fit the figure as skillfully as she did. Over time, the most challenging cases were entrusted to her, and she handled them brilliantly. She even liked the complex tasks, seeing them as a challenge. Ariel ordered another coffee. She needed to warm up. She couldn't afford to get sick and pass it on to her mother, who couldn't afford to be ill. Ariel had recently achieved something almost impossible. She had arranged for a consultation with a renowned cardiology professor, and it was entirely free. Soon, the best specialist in the field would examine her mother, and perhaps he would come up with a treatment plan to alleviate the condition of the not-so-old woman. After all, her mother was just over 40. Yet she struggled to breathe when walking, as if she were 100 years old. And her bathroom shelf was filled with medication bottles. All of this caused Ariel pain and great fear. Olivia somehow distracted the girl from these sad thoughts, shifting her focus just by his existence. He lived as if in some other world. The son of wealthy parents, he fluttered through life like a carefree butterfly. There were meetings with friends, traveling, parties in his life. Always cheerful and happy, he seemed to charge everyone around him with his optimism. Moreover, Olivio was quite the handsome fellow. Tall, athletic, with perfectly chiseled facial features, a broad, white-toothed smile, charming dimples on his cheeks, and a perpetual bronze tan. Olivio often traveled with his parents. Even in winter, they flew to the ocean, where they sunbathed and frolicked in the azure waves. Olivio also dressed stylishly and with taste. He looked like a guy from a fashion magazine and could easily have become a model. But he had different plans for his life. Olivio was studying at a prestigious economics university. When he and Ariel had first met, he was just finishing his penultimate year. Ahead lay a challenging but exciting year, state exams, writing his thesis, graduation, and then working for his father, a well-known local businessman who owned a chain of auto repair shops. What could these two have in common? Ariel, a poor girl who had recently graduated from college and was working as a seamstress, and Olivio, a bright representative of the golden youth? But fate had other plans for them, and by the will of fate they met in a nightclub. Ariel had never been a fan of such places. Firstly, they were very expensive, and Ariel had spent half of her monthly salary to go to this club, which was extremely impractical given her situation. But Sylvia, a childhood friend and neighbor, had begged Ariel to accompany her. Sylvia had always dreamed of a glamorous life and wanted to experience the atmosphere of an upscale nightclub, even if it was just for one evening. She had even bought a special dress for the occasion. How could Ariel refuse her friend's plea? Ariel didn't particularly dress up for the club. She wore her favorite tight jeans and a flowing, wide top. And as it turned out, Ariel had guessed right with her choice of outfit, not Sylvia in her fancy dress. Nearly all the girls in the club were dressed similarly to Ariel. It was no big deal. A couple of times, Sylvia managed to drag her friend onto the dance floor. "Well, did you come here to sit, or what?" Sylvia asked with joyful, shining eyes. And Ariel danced amid the crowd of young people. It was indeed pleasant to let loose and surrender to the waves of sound. In one of those moments, Olivio approached her. He simply stood next to her and started dancing, copying and complimenting Ariel's movements. The girl, noticing this, felt embarrassed and stopped, but he smiled friendly at her, took her hand, and led her, spinning Ariel in the dance. So skillfully and confidently that the two of them seemed to become one. It was an incredible feeling. During the dance, the girl was examining her unexpected partner. He was handsome, incredibly handsome and stylish. And he was dressed very expensively. Ariel was well versed in clothing because of her work at the tailor's shop. The young man wore clothes from expensive brands. How could such a guy even notice her? Maybe the dance would end, he would smile and go back to his similarly wealthy friends. Most likely, he just enjoyed how Ariel danced and decided to dance with her for a few minutes. But Olivio didn't leave. He asked for permission to accompany Ariel back to her table, and since there was no one at the table, Sylvia continued to conquer the dance floor. The young man offered to keep Ariel company. Wow! The girl's heart pounded like a jackhammer. She couldn't believe that such a guy wanted to talk to her. They honestly tried to converse that evening, but the loud music made it practically impossible. Nevertheless, Olivio managed to shower Ariel with compliments she had never heard before. "You are very beautiful and graceful. Your eyes are simply stunning." "When I saw them, something turned inside me," Olivio said, looking directly at Ariel and appearing very serious. The guy clearly wasn't joking or being insincere, he was saying what he felt. Ariel was taken aback. Before, she had only received compliments regarding her unquestionable talent for sewing. She never thought she was beautiful. In school, the boys never paid attention to her, they noticed only the girls with more prominent figures. And what about Ariel? She was thin, tall, angular. Who would notice someone like her? In college, there were no boys either, just like at work. So, Ariel received such delightful compliments for the first time, and her head was spinning. Of course, she immediately fell in love with Olivio. In her eyes, he was the most handsome guy on earth. But she couldn't believe that anything could happen between them. They were too different. Olivio asked Ariel for her phone number so that he could text her. She dictated it, and the young man made the call, asking her to add his number to her contacts. Then Olivio escorted both girls home in a taxi. Sylvia, after drinks, experienced strong emotions and initially didn't notice that Olivio was clearly not interested in her. He delicately deflected her advances, trying not to hurt Sylvia's feelings. This further endeared him to Ariel. How sensitive and considerate he was. Before parting ways, Olivio kissed Ariel's hand. It was evident that he wanted more, to pull her close, maybe even kiss her on the lips. Ariel felt it. But the guy restrained himself and limited the gesture to an elegant one. Still, Ariel didn't believe that Olivio would call her. The next day was a day off, and she didn't have to work. Ariel was on edge from the early morning. On the one hand, she wanted Olivio to call, really wanted to experience those feelings again, just like yesterday. On the other hand, she was a bit afraid. What if Olivio would get disappointed in her during the day, notices some flaws that weren't visible in the nightclub's dim lights? What if he would find her boring, finally realizes that they were not a good match? Seeing disappointment in his eyes would be painful. Olivio called and said he would pick up Ariel in an hour. He suggested going to the city ponds, taking a walk in the park, and getting to know each other better. He added that he couldn't stop thinking about anything else except their meeting from the night before. 1 hour. Just 1 hour. Ariel was very nervous about this date. She tried on all her outfits, choosing the best one. She even did light makeup, something she rarely did. She wanted to keep her inner turmoil hidden from her mother, so as not to worry her. But her mother noticed everything. "Are you getting ready for a date?" she asked with a smile. Ariel nodded. "I'm so happy for you. I hope he's a good guy. Just be careful, okay?" "Don't worry, Mom, we're going to a public place," Ariel reassured her mother. She didn't mention that she would be going to this public place in the car of an almost unfamiliar guy. Why worry her mother? After all, she couldn't explain or prove that Olivio was definitely a good person who wouldn't do anything bad to her. Her mother hadn't interacted with him and hadn't seen his eyes. Besides, trying to explain all this in words would likely be futile. Ariel didn't particularly know about cars, but when she saw Olivio's foreign car, she was taken aback. She immediately realized that it was a very expensive model. A dark blue, glossy, streamlined car. "The carriage awaits," Olivio smiled from the driver's seat. Ariel gathered herself and got into the car. Despite the vast difference in wealth, Olivio behaved simply and sincerely with Ariel. He joked, complimented her, asked about her life, and shared things about himself. Gradually, Ariel began to relax. Olivio was so natural, intelligent, and kind. He was nothing like the spoiled rich kid she had imagined. It was time to break free from stereotypes. People were all different. They strolled for a long time in a beautiful park, admiring the fountains, feeding the ducks, sitting in outdoor cafes, laughing and talking. "It feels like I've finally met a kindred spirit," Olivio shared his impressions. "You're so genuine, I've never met anyone like you." "What about others?" Ariel smiled. "Are they all artificial?" "Exactly, artificial," exclaimed Olivio. Very precise word. Most girls are like photocopies, demanding and capricious. They see me only as a wallet, well, and a pleasant appearance. You can feel it. But with you, it's completely different. Ariel felt a warmth in her heart from these words. It was pleasant to realize that she was special to Olivio, not just one of many. "Yeah, the only thing left is to sympathize you," she joked. "It seems you haven't been around the right people." Apparently, Olivio smiled, looking warmly at his companion. Their romance felt like a fairy tale. Ariel hadn't even dreamt of such a thing. She loved romance novels with soft covers, but had never thought that one day she would practically become the heroine of such a story. Olivia surprised her, showered her with compliments, took her to the most interesting and unusual places in the city that Ariel had never even heard of. He genuinely enjoyed her reactions, surprise, and admiration. "It's so easy to make you happy, so easy to surprise you," he would say sometimes. "It's so nice. I feel like a completely different person when I'm with you, I can't even put it into words." Olivia greatly appreciated Ariel was sincere and not spoiled. Moreover, he often reminded her of how beautiful she was, showing her photos of famous models and actresses who resembled her, and he gave her items that accentuated her physical qualities. Olivia took care of Ariel, tried to make her happy, and protect her. It was so delightful. Ariel was beginning to feel like a real princess, beautiful, delicate, and loved. She had never thought of herself that way before. Certainly, Ariel's mother noticed the changes happening with her daughter and knew about her boyfriend, but they had not met. The woman asked her daughter questions about her chosen one. Upon learning that he was very wealthy, she became a bit uneasy. "Be careful, darling. Rich people tend to choose their equals as life partners and simply amuse themselves with others," she cautioned. "Oh, come on, Mom," Ariel argued. "These are just stereotypes." Of course, her mother didn't understand. She didn't know Olivia, she couldn't see the way he looked at Ariel. Olivia's not like that. Besides, it's the 21st century, and you're still stuck with these outdated ideas, Ariel countered. "I just don't want him to break your heart," her mother shook her head, looking at her daughter with concern. And what happened in the end? Her mother turned out to be right after all. Time passed, and nothing changed. Maybe at first, Olivia was genuinely charmed by Ariel. She was different from his previous girlfriends, modest, unspoiled, hardworking, without any capriciousness, just obedience and admiration. In her effort to please Olivia, Ariel adjusted to his wishes and often agreed with his opinions, even if she thought differently herself. She wanted him to be happy with her. But, of course, they couldn't have a future together. Only then, infatuated with emotions, did Ariel refuse to accept this fact. Ariel and Olivia had been together for almost a year. Their relationship was becoming more serious, and Ariel couldn't imagine her life without her beloved. He also wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. However, Olivia had limited time due to finishing his studies and frequently traveling to the seaside with his parents. On his return, he always brought Ariel gifts, unique jewelry, colorful souvenirs, exotic outfits. Ariel missed him. Olivia said he missed her too while he was at the beach. "Someday, I'll show you all this beauty. You'll look amazing in a white swimsuit against the backdrop of the ocean waves. When I finish university and officially announce that I have a fiancé," Olivia said. "A fiancé?" Ariel's heart sank somewhere deep. Really? It sounded like a proposal deferred in time, but still. "Of course, a fiancé," Olivia nodded. "Aren't you against it? I thought it was self-evident that we would get married soon. Right now, it's not the right time, but that day is not far off." Ariel just hugged Olivia, pressed against him, and closed her eyes. She felt truly happy. Olivia didn't make a formal proposal. There was no ring or wedding planning discussion. It was just implied in that conversation that Ariel and Olivia would eventually get married. Later, Olivia defended his diploma, and his father offered him a job, just as expected from the beginning. Olivia was quickly becoming financially independent, which he was pleased about. Ariel rejoiced along with him and hoped that now he would finally propose to her. However, for several months after defending his diploma, he didn't propose to her. Instead, Olivia mentioned that it was time for Ariel to meet his parents because their relationship was very serious and the family was eager to get to know the chosen one of their only heir. "Do you think it's necessary?" Ariel clarified. She was very anxious about meeting Olivia's relatives. Family had always been very important to him, and Ariel knew that. She was afraid of disappointing his beloved's parents. Of course, it's necessary. Why are you worrying? Everything will be fine, Olivia assured her. As always, Ariel unquestionably believed Olivia's words because he still seemed strong, reliable, and determined to her at that time. If her beloved said that everything would be fine, then it would be. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday evening at one of the city's most luxurious restaurants. Ariel had looked at photos of the restaurant's interior on social media in advance and became even more nervous. She always felt awkward in such settings. Although Olivia occasionally invited her to similar places, this time she would have to interact with his parents, and she didn't know how they would perceive her. On the other hand, even if she didn't make a good impression on Olivia's mother and father, it wouldn't affect their relationship. He was already independent and an adult, making his own choices in life, as Olivia had emphasized. So Ariel's happiness didn't depend on this meeting. Still, she wanted to make a good impression on her beloved's parents so that their future family would be filled with peace, harmony, and warmth. Ariel decided to take the bus to the restaurant. She had run out of money for a taxi, and her next paycheck was still a week away. Most of her earnings for the month had gone toward her mother's medication. But it was all right, Ariel didn't mind taking the bus. In fact, she sometimes intentionally chose longer routes to enjoy the cityscape and have some time to herself. However, she couldn't relax this time. She kept winding herself up with anxious thoughts, and her soul was restless. Ariel had a gut feeling that the meeting wouldn't go smoothly, and as it turned out later, her intuition didn't fail her. The bus was nearly empty, rush hour had long passed. Ariel sat with her forehead pressed against the cool window, trying to calm herself down, but it wasn't working. Perhaps she shouldn't have worn this sundress? Its length was decent, below the knee, but her shoulders were too exposed. Would Olivia's parents think her outfit was vulgar? Maybe she should have opted for a light business suit? Well, she wasn't going to the office after all. Ariel's thoughts were interrupted by the shrill cry of the conductor. Aren't you ashamed to ride public transport without a ticket at your age? Ariel glanced toward the source of the noise. At the far end of the bus, near the driver's seat, an unpleasant scene was unfolding. The conductor in an orange vest, a plump woman with cheaply dyed hair, was looming over a frail elderly lady. The old woman clung to her seat, clutching a fabric bag filled with something, and stared at the enforcer of order with a frightened expression on her face. Let me explain to you, I'm going to visit my grandson in the hospital. I spent my entire pension on treats for him. Do you understand? Are you really so bothered if I quietly ride a few stops here? The cabin is empty anyway. And if it fills up, I'll stand in a corner and won't occupy a seat for no reason, the old lady explained. Empty or not, it's none of your business, the conductor snapped. You should only pay for your ticket. Please pay the required amount. If I let everyone ride for free like this, they'd stop paying my salary. Pay or get off. The elderly woman kept talking about her grandson who was in the hospital and needed the items she was carrying. There are medicines, groceries, and some other things, she said. The elderly lady tried to reach out to the conductor, clutching her chest, and it even seemed like she might burst into tears. Still, the enforcer of order remained adamant, demanding payment for the ride. Ariel suddenly felt very sorry for the old lady, who was so desperate to reach her grandson. Perhaps there was no one else to come to see this person, who knew in what situation people found themselves. The fare wasn't that high. Ariel wasn't wealthy, but she could certainly spare that amount for a good deed. The old lady had eyes filled with despair and fear. No, Ariel just couldn't stand by like the other few passengers and watch the scene indifferently. I'll pay for this lady, Ariel said, handing some change to the conductor. The conductor gave the elderly lady a disdainful look, issued Ariel a ticket, and immediately handed it to the old woman. Ariel was about to return to her seat, but the passenger grabbed her hand with her dry but unexpectedly strong grip. Thank you so much, the elderly lady said warmly. Thank you for your kindness. Don't think I'm some beggar. I do have a pension. I've worked at the factory my whole life. But this month, there's been trouble. My grandson, Benito, had an accident and I had to buy him everything. Now I'm taking it all to the hospital. I don't have any money left. Can you give me your phone number, and when I receive some money, I'll transfer it to you? It was another surprise. It turned out this elderly lady knew how to use mobile bank apps. She was quite a modern senior citizen. No, you don't need to, Ariel insisted. I won't become poor because of this small amount, but it's clear that you're in a tough financial situation. Throughout the journey to the hospital, the old lady continued to thank Ariel and told her about her grandson Benito. It seemed that he was a very decent young man. The grandmother worried about him because, after the accident, he ended up in the hospital with injuries, but she was relieved that he was still relatively unharmed. The wounds will heal, they won't disappear, the talkative fellow passengers said. The most important thing is that he's in his right mind. Ariel nodded with a smile. Then, the elderly lady got off at her stop, and Ariel continued the rest of her journey in silence. The chatty passenger had momentarily distracted her from her anxious thoughts and eased her nervousness. However, as Ariel sat at the cafe table, soaking wet and flushed, she scolded herself. She should have listened to her intuition and not gone to this meeting. Now she clearly understood that nothing good could have come out of it and saw the situation in its entirety. But just a few hours ago, she had been full of hope for a happy future with Olivio. The luxurious ambience of the restaurant certainly made Ariel much more nervous. She immediately spotted the table where Olivio was sitting with his parents. When he noticed her, he greeted her with a smile, approached and hugged her, patted her back, and complimented her on her appearance. All of this, of course, slightly reassured Ariel. Whenever she was with Olivio, she felt a sense of security, although, as she would later discover, it was a false sense. Olivio's parents looked pretty much as Ariel had imagined them. His father was a sporty, well-built man with elegant graying hair on his temples, a tanned complexion, and handsome appearance. He had the same dimples on his cheeks as Olivio and the same finely chiseled facial features. It was clear where his son inherited his appearance from. His mother was a well-groomed woman who, of course, was a frequent visitor to beauty salons. Her smooth face with flawless skin, impeccable manicure, regal posture, and a gaze with cold light blue eyes. Ariel felt as if she had been hit by an icy shower when the woman looked her over. In that moment, she intuitively understood everything, but it hadn't fully fit in her head yet. She was still hoping for a favorable outcome. "Hello there, dear lady," Olivio's father said without a trace of a smile. "Hello," Ariel replied, smiling broadly. "It's nice to finally meet you," Olivio's mother said, her lips stretching into a polite semblance of a smile, but her eyes remained serious and cold. Everyone introduced themselves. The waiter brought their orders. Initially, the conversation was about nothing in particular: weather, city news. Ariel occasionally inserted her own remarks, trying to be an active participant in the conversation. After each of her phrases, Olivio's parents exchanged meaningful glances. Ariel closely monitored their reactions, as did Olivio. At that moment, the young man looked less like an independent adult and more like a little child, and Ariel didn't like it at all. Then, the conversation turned to Ariel herself. "Tell us a bit about yourself," Olivio's mother asked her. "Zero, our son, takes his relationship with you very seriously. He doesn't introduce just anyone to us. Although, of course, it's not the first time this has happened. Olivio is quite the romantic. Nevertheless, we'd like to know more about you." Ariel cringed when she said not the first time. She felt like it was a hint for her that she wasn't unique or one of a kind, but rather one of many. Moreover, the tone of this well-groomed and wealthy woman was hostile, with a metallic edge. Ariel proceeded to tell her story. Olivio's parents occasionally asked her more detailed questions. Who was her mother? Where was her father? What was Ariel's occupation? Which educational institution had she graduated from? Ariel's answers seemed to elicit a strange reaction from these people. They exchanged glances, smirked, and it was uncomfortable. Olivio, he sat next to his mother and remained silent. He didn't even attempt to lighten the atmosphere or help his girlfriend. "Why did you choose a college?" Olivio's mother inquired. "You probably didn't do well in school, which is why you couldn't get into a university, right?" Ariel brushed that remark aside. This woman was clearly trying to provoke her, to get an emotional reaction. Ariel wasn't going to oblige. Ariel had done well in school, she had graduated with honors. She just needed to obtain a profession quickly and get a job because their family's financial situation was precarious. But there was no need to explain all of that now. The conversation became increasingly uncomfortable as Olivio's parents started asking more personal questions and making remarks that turned Ariel inside out. Ariel felt like a beggar and a limited fool sitting at that table with those people. She hadn't done anything wrong to anyone, but for some reason, she felt ashamed of the facts of her life. However, Mrs. Olivio's adept ability to twist Ariel's stories around was the most disturbing. Ariel felt like a pauper and an idiot sitting at that table next to those people. She hadn't done anything wrong to anyone, but for some reason, she felt ashamed of the facts of her life. However, Mrs. Olivio's adept ability to twist Ariel's stories around was the most disturbing. The girl felt like a loser and a narrow-minded fool sitting at this table next to these people. She didn't have enough brain to go to university, she was lazy, dreaming of seducing a wealthy heir and solving her life problems that way. And maybe she really was like that? Feeling the icy gaze of the unfriendly woman, Ariel suddenly realized that she had indeed hoped for Olivio's help in treating her mother. Olivio. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at Ariel, moving closer to his father, and it so happened that the young man seemed to hide behind his mother's shoulder. While Ariel was being smeared, Olivio didn't even attempt to stand up for her. It was so unlike him that the girl felt even more lost. Olivio had always been on her side, supporting and encouraging her. But now he looked like a little boy, afraid of disappointing his parents. And then Ariel realized it all. No, she and Olivio didn't have a future together. His parents were making it abundantly clear to their son. Their goal wasn't even to humiliate Ariel. They were demonstrating to their only heir that the girl, a seamstress, living with her sick mother in a tiny apartment, was not a match for him, and their son was learning the lesson perfectly. Olivio would never go against his parents' will, he was too dependent on them. All his achievements and well-being were his father's doing. Ariel's feelings and emotions were entirely insignificant to these people. She felt like she was a teaching aid. Olivio's mother didn't care at all that such humiliation could cause psychological trauma to the girl. The main thing was to demonstrate to her son the fallacy and foolishness of his choice. Apparently, that's why the meeting was set up in the first place. Ariel felt tears welling up in her eyes. What had she done to deserve this? What wrong had she done to these people? Throughout her life, Ariel had not done a single thing that she should be ashamed of. She got up from her seat. I understand everything now. It's time for me to go. She didn't want to break down in front of this family. No, she wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Ariel hurried towards the exit of the restaurant. No one tried to stop her. She still hoped that Olivio would run after her. After all, he loved her so much, he had said it many times. But Olivio stayed with his parents. Once outside, the girl burst into tears. Luckily, it was raining, and it went unnoticed by those around her. Ariel didn't wait for the bus, she started walking. Movement always calmed her. The rain was pouring down heavily, her light dress immediately soaked through and clung to her body. Passers-by sought shelter under awnings to wait out the downpour, but Ariel walked on. She didn't notice any discomfort, as she was not in that state of mind. How could Olivio treat her like this? Ariel had been so sure about this person, grateful that she had found her soulmate so early in life. It turned out she had made it all up. Olivio was only interested in her as a novelty. He was used to dating spoiled princesses, and here was a modest girl who had never seen anything bright and interesting in her life. Perhaps he enjoyed feeling like a patron, opening up the world to a poor beauty. But he clearly had no special feelings for her, otherwise Olivia would not have sat there like a statue while his mother humiliated the defenseless girl right in front of him. And now Ariel sat in the shopping center, gulping down one cup of coffee after another. Her hair had almost completely dried and now curled beautifully. The dress was also dry. And Ariel had recovered enough to meet her mother. She would act as if nothing had happened. She couldn't let her mother see the darkness in her soul. She needed to protect her mother. She was the only person in the world who genuinely loved Ariel and probably always would. Men. They were likely all the same as Olivia. They could sweet-talk you and then, after having fun, break up with you. Perhaps her father had been the same. Maybe her mother was hiding something from her, or simply didn't realize that the boy she had once blindly fallen in love with had run away from her. Ariel returned home and immediately went to the bathroom. "Did you get caught in the rain?" asked her mother, who was lying in the bedroom, clutching her chest. She was feeling unwell again. "Yes," Ariel smiled casually, "I got completely soaked. I want to take a hot shower and not to get sick. I'll make you some coffee now." "No, lie down and rest. I'll do it myself." In the shower, Ariel shed a few more tears. This time, the tears brought relief, washing away the negative emotions. Ariel tried hard to act as if nothing had happened, but her mother noticed the changes in her daughter. Nothing could be hidden from her attentive gaze. "Did you have a fight with Olivia? How did you know?" "Well, first of all, you're not going on dates anymore. That's hard not to notice. And secondly, your eyes have been so sad lately." "We broke up," Ariel nodded. "He turned out to be quite a mama's boy. Thankfully, I realized it in time." "Did he hurt you?" "No, not at all. I just saw that he's an ordinary mama's boy, and that's not what I want. I was disappointed, of course, but it's all okay now. The Olivia I fell in love with, he didn't even exist, you know? I just had a perfect image of him in my head. That's why I'm sad. But I'll be smarter in the future." Ariel smiled broadly, trying to show her mother that everything was fine. However, deep down, she still felt the pain. Her dreams of a happy life with her beloved had been shattered. Ariel still recalled the old Olivia with a sense of longing, the one who existed in her imagination before that restaurant encounter. She had thought she had found the perfect man, only to discover that such individuals probably didn't exist. It had been so painful and frightening for her then. Olivia's parents, especially his mother, had humiliated her without restraint and showed no regard for her feelings. If only Olivia had tried to defend his girlfriend, to support her, Ariel wouldn't feel as devastated as she did now. But, alas. Ariel tried to continue with her life as before. She worked, spent time with her friends, and read a lot. She constantly cleaned her apartment to distract herself, and while her home was clean, her heart remained far from peaceful. Then came the long-awaited appointment with the professor. Ariel went to the clinic with her mother. The professor turned out to be a tall, thin old man with piercing blue eyes. He carefully reviewed the history of the seriously ill patient. He didn't say anything immediately but ordered several additional tests. All the necessary procedures were carried out at the same clinic, quickly and efficiently, without waiting in long queues. The professor personally escorted Ariel's mother to different departments. Ariel was delighted. What an attentive approach he had. At their previous hospital, they'd never experienced it. As it turned out, the professor was in a hurry for a reason. He, an experienced medical professional, quickly realized that the situation was dire, critical. After all the examinations, the trio returned to the professor's office. The professor was ready to deliver his verdict. "Well, there's nothing good I can tell you," he said, gesturing with his hands. "It's hard to believe that these are the test results of such a young woman. Your heart is worn out, it's barely functioning. Medications won't help, you need surgery." Ariel clenched her mother's hands tightly, and her mother hung on to every word of the doctor, trying to stay calm. The operation should have been done a long time ago. I don't understand how your primary doctor could have let the situation deteriorate like this. Irritation was evident in the professor's voice. You might even consider suing him, but that can wait. Right now, the most important thing is the surgery. Then the professor went on to explain the details. The upcoming operation was going to be complex, very complex. Not every cardiac surgeon would take on a patient in such a condition. Treatment had to be done in the capital city. That meant they needed money for travel expenses, accommodation, and the cost of expensive medications. Moreover, the surgery itself was exorbitantly expensive. When the professor mentioned the amount, Ariel flinched. There was simply no way for her and her mother to come up with that kind of money unless they sold their apartment and ended up on the streets. But even if they did that, real estate wouldn't sell so quickly, and the money was needed right now. All of this needs to be done as soon as possible, the professor said seriously, looking at the bewildered visitors. Every day matters. What happens if we don't have the surgery? Ariel's mother asked. I just can't imagine where we would find such a sum. Is medical therapy an option? No, the doctor replied immediately. No medications will help you at this point, only surgery. What should we do? Ariel whispered. She was barely holding back tears welling up in her eyes. All her previous worries about her disappointment in Olivia suddenly seemed utterly insignificant. This was a real catastrophe, and she didn't know how to deal with it. You could try reaching out to a charitable foundation, the professor suggested. They often raise funds for medical treatments and help many people. The doctor quickly typed on his keyboard to find the relevant folder, located what he was looking for, and printed a list of charitable foundations. Here, this is a list of foundations that actually provide help and aren't involved in fraud. Ariel grabbed the list like a drowning person grabbing onto a straw. On the way home, both mother and daughter remained silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The woman was facing a difficult choice, to fight or leave everything as it was because the odds were heavily against her. Ariel, on the other hand, was feverishly searching for a solution. She saw no other way but to fight for her mother's life until the very end. Upon returning home, Ariel immediately started calling every charitable foundation on the list. She hoped they would help, she was certain they would. But no one was willing to assist them. Ariel received various responses to her inquiries. Some immediately stated that they exclusively focused on sick children, as if adults didn't find themselves in dire situations or didn't want to live as much. There were also vague rejections without sensible explanations. Only after calling to one place Ariel opened her eyes. You see, the woman who answered the call explained with a guilty tone, your situation isn't very appealing. People tend to donate for little kids and parents of young children so that they don't become orphans, especially mothers. In your case, you're an adult woman, working, and your daughter is already grown up. So, there's no chance that anyone will respond to your plea. Ariel was grateful to the woman for her, albeit harsh, honesty. At least now she understood why all the foundations were turning them down. It meant she had to find alternative ways out of this dire situation. Hoping for foundations was just a waste of precious time. Mom, let's put the apartment up for sale at a lower price so that a buyer is found sooner, Ariel suggested. No, her mother sighed, the operation may not even help. And if we sell the apartment, where will you live? How will you manage? No, let everything go as it goes. No! Ariel exclaimed. No, don't even think about it. We'll find the money, everything will work out. Every spare moment, Ariel now monitored job listings. She was willing to do anything, work in remote locations in the north, respond to questionable advertisements offering obviously illegal activities for relatively good pay. But she quickly realized that this wasn't a solution either. By the time she got a job and worked for a couple of months to qualify for a loan, precious time would have been lost. Plus, there was the risk of falling into trouble, dealing with scammers. Most of the ads promising riches seemed highly suspicious. And if something happened to her, how would her mother cope? Who would help her? Ariel was in despair. She cried every day out of helplessness, secretly from her mother. In contrast, her mother appeared surprisingly calm. She seemed to have accepted her fate and didn't even attempt to do anything, understanding that it was futile. One day, Ariel took a desperate step because she had no one else to turn to. She dialed Olivio's number. They hadn't communicated all this time. Olivio hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't even tried to apologize for his behavior at the restaurant. It seemed like he was perfectly fine with Ariel disappearing from his life. One less problem to deal with. After everything that had happened, Ariel despised Olivio. She considered him a mama's boy, and even his name irritated her. She had deleted all their shared photos to avoid stumbling upon them on her phone. Those pictures just kept hurting her. In them, she was so happy, so in love, and she had no idea what awaited her. But, one way or another, only Olivio could help her. He was wealthy, didn't worry about money, and might lend her the necessary amount, even with interest, just to get the money sooner. Ariel knew a bank wouldn't grant her such a loan. Her financial stability was too low. But she would try to find work wherever possible, just to pay off the debt as quickly as possible. She wasn't afraid of work, but the prospect of losing her mother terrified her to the core. Of course, it wasn't easy to dial Olivio's number, but she was doing it for her mother. If it weren't for her mother's illness, Ariel would never have contacted her failed fiancé. Olivio answered immediately. His voice sounded somewhat surprised, but there was no hint of guilt or remorse in it. Olivio spoke to Ariel as if nothing had happened, as if an old classmate had suddenly called him. "Hello. How are you?" he politely inquired. "Not great," Ariel admitted. "I hope you're not going to start telling me about your broken feelings now. I really don't like that kind of stuff. What's done is done. It happened, and it's over, and we move on." "Actually, it's not about hurt feelings at all," Ariel sighed. "You see, my mother. She's very ill. I told you about it, remember? It's her heart." "I vaguely remember something like that." "So, what's next?" "What's next is that she urgently needs surgery, or she'll die." "I'm sorry, that's sad. I hope everything turns out well for her. The problem is that the surgery isn't free, it costs a lot of money. We don't have it, and nowhere to get it." "Ah, I see," Olivio chuckled. "My mother turns out to be a prophet. She warned that once the fish slips off the hook, you'll try to catch your prey in a different way. Of course, my mother thought it would be a heart-wrenching story about your own illness or a sudden pregnancy, but you brought your mother into it." Ariel was stunned. Did Olivio really think she just wanted to extort money from him? Had he completely misunderstood her during their time together? How could Olivio say such things? It was unfair, painful, and hard emotionally. Unjust accusations and allegations of materialism hurt her deeply. However, Ariel pulled herself together. She couldn't afford to show weakness or take offense right now. Olivio was her last hope. "Olivio, please listen, this is all true. I can provide documents, the professor's diagnosis, the clinic's cost estimate. It's easy to fabricate all of that," Olivio sneered. "The professor will call you himself, I'll ask him to." "Are you making fun of me? Anyone could make that call. You think I'm a sucker." "Olivio, but it's true." "Enough," Olivio replied sharply. "I'm tired of listening to this nonsense. Initially, I even felt guilty about how things turned out. You seemed like a naive and sincere girl to me at first. But now I see that my mother was right. She accurately predicted your behavior. That's it. Don't call me anymore." The call ended abruptly. Ariel repeatedly dialed Olivio's number again and again. She just couldn't convey to him how serious the situation was. She needed to explain better, he would understand. But it seemed that Olivio had blocked her number. That was it. Her last hope had vanished, like dew on a hot summer day. Ariel couldn't imagine who else to turn to. Olivia had once again crushed and humiliated her, making her feel like a fraud. How could this be? Tears welled up in Ariel's eyes. She couldn't and didn't want to hold them back. How often she had cried recently. Ariel was standing on the street, right at the bus stop. Fortunately, there were no other people nearby. How would they react to a girl sobbing uncontrollably? But in any case, it hardly mattered now. Ariel helplessly was sitting down on a bench, hugging herself tightly. Tremors coursed through her entire body, and she couldn't do anything about this condition. It was probably a fit of hysteria. Ariel was tired of fighting, tired of knocking on every door and getting rejected everywhere. And then there was Olivia. She had to turn to a person who had once trampled on her and humiliated her, and he had done it again. But most importantly, Ariel still couldn't help her mother. Watching a loved one slowly fading away day by day was unbearable. Her mother had grown weaker right before her eyes. She no longer went to work, sitting at home on endless medical leaves. Her boss threatened to fire her. Who needed an employee like her? And what about the housework? Her mother could barely move around. Yet, she was still so young. And Ariel, the grown-up daughter, couldn't help her own family. If it weren't for Ariel, her mother would be feeling much better now. Even the professor had said that pregnancy and childbirth had severely undermined the woman's health. Large tears streamed down Ariel's cheeks, and it was hard to catch her breath between sobs she was trying to suppress. Ariel just couldn't pull herself together. And then, right in front of her, a car pulled over. It stopped, and so what? Perhaps someone was just dropped off at the bus stop. These things happen. Ariel tried her best to calm down so as not to frighten people. But no, that wasn't the case. The window on the driver's side slowly rolled down, and Ariel met the gaze of attentive gray eyes. It was a young man, a little older than Ariel by the looks of it. He was openly observing the girl, while she continued to cry, unable to regain her composure. I told you something was wrong with her from the very beginning," an elderly voice came from the back seat. The man turned to his invisible passenger and absent-mindedly nodded, then addressed Ariel. "Young lady, what's wrong with you? Do you need help?" No, Ariel protested. Suddenly, she felt embarrassed for sitting there crying in front of everyone. People had stopped because of her, and they probably had their own business to attend to, maybe even in a hurry. "No, don't be shy. If someone has offended you, or something has happened, please share," the man continued. At this point, the rear door of the car swung open, and an elderly woman stepped out. She was wearing a light pantsuit, her gray hair neatly tied up in an elegant bun. This elderly lady bore little resemblance to the old lady in the tram with the scarf who couldn't find the money for her fare. Yet, it was her. Ariel recognized her. What a coincidence it was. Their city wasn't small, so what were the odds of them meeting again? Nevertheless, it happened. "I know you. How kind you were." The old lady warmly and affectionately smiled. "Benito, it's that very girl from the tram. Remember, I told you? The one who paid for me when I was going to the hospital." The man also got out of the car. Now both the grandmother and the grandson were standing opposite Ariel, whose tears had dried up from surprise. "Yes, of course, I remember that story." The young man smiled at the grandmother and then looked at Ariel. "You see, I got into a minor car accident, and they left me in the hospital just for observation overnight. I didn't even want to tell Grandma. It's just that her friend works as a nurse at this hospital, and she let it slip. So, Grandma dropped everything, spent the last of her pension on buying me food and medicine for a year in advance, and rushed to the hospital." Ariel found it delightful to watch this friendly quarrel. These were good, caring, and sensitive people who clearly cared deeply for each other. "But I remember thinking back then, in the tram, that your grandson was a boy or a teenager," Ariel admitted. He will always be a little one to me, even though he's over 2 meters tall and has been supporting himself for a long time, the grandmother smiled. But what about you, dear? Are you in trouble? Don't be shy, you're a kind girl. You helped me back then, you couldn't stay indifferent. Perhaps we can help you in some way. Ariel sighed. How could they help her? What could these people possibly do? Ariel was facing insurmountable problems, far too complex for her, and no one, absolutely no one in the world, could help her. However, Ariel suddenly realized that she really wanted to share her troubles with someone. Benito, his grandmother, they would listen to her, that was for sure, and at the very least, they would sympathize with her. Ariel realized that she had been keeping her worries to herself all this time, unable to confide in anyone, not even her mother, because her mother had a bad heart and she couldn't worry her. But now, these potential listeners were sitting right there, asking her to open up, and that's exactly what Ariel needed right now. Well then, will you finally tell us what happened to you? The old lady asked again. Aren't you in a hurry? Ariel asked. My story isn't very short. We're not in a hurry, the grandmother and grandson replied in unison. All right, Ariel nodded. Then let's find a more pleasant place to talk, Benito suggested, looking around. Oh, there seems to be a nice pizzeria over there. What do you think of that idea? I'm in, the grandmother immediately responded. Me too, Ariel nodded, feverishly calculating how much money she had left on her card. Great. The cozy ambience, stylish furniture, and pleasant music in the pizzeria created a conducive atmosphere for conversation. Benito, despite Ariel's objections, paid for the order. The group settled at a table tucked away behind a shelf with live flowers. Well, now, tell us about your troubles, the grandmother smiled. We'll all think together about how to help you. All right, Ariel nodded, still puzzled about why these people wanted to listen to her and, even more so, help her. Sure, she had paid for the old lady on the bus, but that was hardly worth discussing, and yet here they were. Ariel began to share everything with them, her life with her mother in a tiny apartment, her constant sense of guilt for the illness of the most important person in her life, her fears for her mother's life and health, which Ariel had experienced from a very young age. She mentioned Olivio as well, explaining that she had taken the bus that day to meet his parents. She didn't provide details about the behavior of Olivio's parents, but merely mentioned that they had made it clear that she was not suitable for their son. She also revealed that she had broken up with her fiancé after that incident. This part of the story was not directly relevant, but Ariel couldn't help herself. The breakup with Olivio still haunted her. She had never told anyone about her feelings and experiences, and now, suddenly, there were attentive listeners. Well, she might as well share the burden. Rotten people, the grandmother declared indignantly. Not nice at all. Nothing good will come of their lives. They'll marry off their overgrown son to a suitable girl without love or consent. We've seen many examples of that. Life will still punish Olivio and his parents. Benito, on the other hand, didn't say anything, but he looked at Ariel with such sympathy and empathy that words weren't necessary. Ariel felt supported and approved of by this man. It was a comforting feeling. Then came the part of the story about her mother. Ariel told them about the consultation with the renowned professor and his diagnosis. And now my mom needs an expensive surgery, and it needs to happen urgently. I tried to find the money, I did everything I could, even asked Olivio. But he thought I was some kind of fraudster, so I broke down in tears at the bus stop after our conversation. What a fool! The grandmother exclaimed in anger. He doesn't understand people at all. I've only seen you twice in my life, and I can tell that you're a very honest and modest young lady. And he spent so much time with you and still didn't realize it. Olivio, whom the old lady didn't even know, greatly irritated her. It almost seemed funny if the situation weren't so tragic. In short, I have nowhere to get the money, Ariel concluded. And without the surgery, my mom. The girl still couldn't utter the dreadful word, but the listeners understood everything. The old lady hugged Ariel and began to gently stroke her head. Ariel started crying again. Well, where could she hide from these silly tears? She couldn't help it. For the first time, she was being listened to, and for the first time, people sympathized her. It was priceless. But the trouble hadn't gone away, and the problems hadn't magically disappeared. Money didn't materialize out of thin air. The old lady comforted Ariel and whispered comforting words that did, indeed, make her feel better. Benito, on the other hand, silently observed the scene and seemed to be deep in thought. How much money do you need? The man finally asked. Ariel mentioned the figures, which sent her into a panic. Benito raised his eyebrows in surprise. And you, grandson, what did you think? The grandmother sighed. These are the prices nowadays, and an ordinary person can't afford to fall ill. Can't this surgery be done for free? He asked. It can, Ariel replied, having regained control of her emotions with the help of the kind old lady. But we should wait for almost a year, and my mom doesn't have that much time. Well, I'm willing to provide the amount for the treatment, Benito stated. The grandmother looked at her grandson with pride and approval. Ariel's eyes widened in surprise. Could Benito really afford to give her such a sum? He didn't appear to be extremely wealthy. He dressed well, but not extravagantly, and his car was good, but not elite, like Olivio's. Moreover, how could she accept such a gift from practically strangers? Ariel's mind was in turmoil. How could she think about such details when her mother was slowly deteriorating without the surgery? She needed to focus on finding a solution. I'm afraid I can't accept such a sum. It just doesn't feel right, Ariel said. Everything is right and fair, the old lady reassured her. You helped me in a difficult situation, and now Benito is helping you. It's like karma, ever heard of it? The amounts are quite different, Ariel pointed out. So what? Don't worry, Benito smiled and covered Ariel's hand with his warm palm, a friendly gesture that made Ariel feel better. I have the means to do this, and, in fact, I allocate a certain amount for charity every year. It's a firm rule of mine, so. Ariel couldn't understand any of it. If this Benito was so wealthy, why didn't his grandmother have enough money for bus fare? Benito is a wonderful young man, the grandmother proudly declared. He's a successful businessman. I raised him since he was a baby, after his parents died when he was just a little boy. I'm not even his real grandmother, just a lonely neighbor. I couldn't bear the thought of the child of my dear neighbors ending up in an orphanage, so I took him in, raised him like my own grandson. And from a very young age, he was smart beyond his years and serious. I knew right away that he would go far, and I was right. Granny never misses an opportunity to boast about me, Benito smiled. But she's right. I have indeed managed to build a business that generates a steady income. We make custom furniture. We have many branches now, not only in our city. There's even a branch in the capital, the grandmother added, gazing at her grandson adoringly. Every year, I allocate a certain amount for charity, Benito continued. Let your mother be the recipient of that this year. Besides, it seems like we met by the will of fate. What were the chances of us running into you at that very moment when you were crying out of despair and helplessness at the bus stop? Such coincidences just don't happen. So, can you really give us that much money? Ariel still couldn't believe her luck, but I can't just take it from you like that, she hesitated. Let's make it a formal agreement. I'll gradually repay the debt, I'll return everything. You're so stubborn, the old lady exclaimed, throwing up her hands. I understand that you might feel awkward, Benito shook his head, looking closely at Ariel. I can tell it from your behavior. I'm good at reading people. He's very perceptive, the grandmother confirmed her grandson's words. In business, you have to be. So, let's do this. I've been wanting to invest in a new venture for a while now. We'll set up a limited liability company for you, a tailoring studio specializing in custom clothing. You're certainly talented in this, according to your story. The amount for your mother's treatment will be a part of the investments in this company. Then, when this business starts generating profits, which will definitely happen, I'm quite knowledgeable in these matters, you can gradually repay me these funds as a part of the profit due to an investor. I hope I made it clear." Ariel nodded. What was happening seemed more and more like a fairy tale. Investments, a company, a new interesting job. And most importantly, money for her mother's surgery. Could this really be happening in reality? Ariel suddenly feared that she would wake up any moment and find that she had merely dreamt this wonderful dream. But no, it was all true. Benito and Ariel exchanged phone numbers, and his grandmother took Ariel's number too. "Call me when you're feeling down," the old lady said, "and just stay in touch. You're a very pleasant person, and it's enjoyable talking to you." And so, everything started moving quickly, picking up pace. Ariel's life was changing with each passing day, and these changes were making her head spin. Firstly, her mother was sent for surgery in the capital. Benito not only covered the necessary medical procedures, but also organized everything down to the last detail. He bought tickets, arranged for Ariel's accommodation in the capital, secured a comfortable room for her mother, and found all the rare medicines on the list. Ariel wouldn't have been able to handle it all by herself, especially not so quickly. Benito, on the other hand, resolved every issue as easily as snapping his fingers. He was an incredible person. Benito didn't say much, only what was necessary. Unlike his grandmother, he turned out to be a rather quiet man. Often, Benito and Ariel traveled together for various tasks, and they both remained silent, but the silence wasn't oppressive and didn't lead to awkwardness. Ariel could feel waves of warmth and acceptance emanating from Benito. She was well aware that she was falling for him. Well, who wouldn't? He was simply the perfect man. However, Ariel always reminded herself that Benito surely had a significant other. He wasn't married, and there was no wedding ring on his finger, but he definitely wasn't single. Of course, his chosen one must also be perfect, some beauty with model looks, a pure heart, and impeccable manners. Ariel couldn't possibly compare. So, Ariel could only occasionally daydream that one day Benito would notice her as a woman. These daydreams seemed like an impossible fantasy to her. For 2 weeks, while her mother recovered in the hospital after the complicated surgery, Ariel stayed in the capital. She visited her mother every day, brought her treats, and encouraged her. The doctor reported that the surgery had been successful and added that the patient had just managed to come just in time. A little more, and... In short, Benito and his grandmother had met Ariel at just the right time. Benito's grandmother kept in constant contact. She checked on Ariel's mother's health, rejoiced in the evident improvements with Ariel, and also suggested places worth visiting in the capital during her free time. Ariel had visited so many places during this time, seen so many things. It was very exciting, as she had never been to the capital before. Benito also frequently called, but the nature of their conversations was more business-oriented. He was busy setting up the new LLC, a company where Ariel would be the director and head tailor. This made Ariel somewhat anxious. Could she handle it? Well, she excelled at designing and sewing, which was her passion. It was fantastic that she finally had the opportunity to earn a living doing what she loved, what truly inspired her. Ariel had long felt that her talent was going to waste working as an ordinary seamstress, altering clothes to fit, which was nothing like creating custom-designed garments. That's where her imagination could truly take flight. Now, however, she had to dive into the paperwork and legal matters because Ariel was going to be the director and co-owner of the company. She believed she could handle it. The most important thing was that her mother was saved. Ariel would do everything in her power to make the company thrive, ensuring that Benito wouldn't regret his decision. She would repay him the entire amount, and even more. Time passed by. Ariel's mother made a full recovery, and she was discharged from the hospital. Mother and daughter returned home, with plans and hopes for a new life. Ariel's mother went back to work, no longer needing to take sick leave, and she looked rejuvenated, like a healthy, energetic woman. Ariel, on the other hand, immersed herself completely in her newly established business. Work was captivating, inspiring, and joyful. Ariel couldn't be happier with what she was doing. Benito helped her with the documents and legal matters. There was no need to ask him. It was as if he had an inner sense of when and where problems arose, and he effortlessly resolved them, as he always did. Ariel struggled to hold back her feelings for Benito. He had saved her in a difficult and seemingly hopeless situation. Naturally, she felt a romantic attachment to her savior, but did Benito need that? Probably not. He was just a good person who couldn't ignore the tears of a distraught girl at the bus stop. Moreover, he was a businessman trying out a new project, a tailor shop specializing in custom-made clothing. It had the potential to be a profitable venture, and that's why he had gotten involved. Benito was serious, reserved, and perhaps a bit stern. Looking at him, it was hard to imagine how kind and compassionate he truly was. He communicated brusquely with his employees and especially avoided personal connections. One day, he shared his life story with Ariel. It happened on one of those late nights when they had stayed behind to work on their report. Benito lost his parents at a very young age. There was a fire in their wooden house, and although the vigilant neighbor, the same woman from the bus, had called the firefighters in time, the wooden structure went up in flames like a matchbox. Luckily, Benito was spared. His mother had put him down for a nap outside in his stroller, and she was inside the house, working in the kitchen when the fire broke out. The fire immediately cut off her path to the door, which was also blocked by the flames. His father was working in the attic and was unable to escape. The house was old, with outdated electrical wiring that desperately needed replacing, and there were bars on the windows from the previous owners. Benito was taken in by the very neighbor who had raised the alarm. She loved Benito's parents and often told him that they were both good, hard-working people who had grown up in an orphanage. They were both intelligent and determined to succeed in life. They could have achieved so much if not for that cursed fire, the neighbor would lament. Now it's up to you to live for all three of you and fulfill your parents' plans and hopes. Benito tried his best. He was an excellent student, and studying came easily to him. He had time for walks and extracurricular activities. At an early age, Benito displayed a talent for working with his hands. In his childhood, he began making simple furniture on his own. When he was 11, he and a couple of friends set out on a journey along the highway to sell the furniture he had crafted. They sold the lightweight chairs and tables quickly. People bought the simple furniture for their gardens and summer cottages. Benito even received his first orders during that trip. Slowly but surely, Benito established his own production. By the time he finished school, he had his own company with employees, regular suppliers, and customers. Everything was as it should be, except it was all unofficial since Benito was still a minor. However, he had real money coming in. Then, he easily got into the local economics university. He deliberately chose that field of study to learn how to run his business correctly and officially. Well, at one point, I decided to legalize my mini firm, Benito smiled, recalling those times. And I succeeded. From there, it only got bigger. We grew, expanded, and opened branches. Now I'm the owner of my own mini empire. After hearing this story, Ariel had even greater respect for Benito. What an incredible person! He had risen from the bottom, going from making makeshift furniture to owning a network of furniture manufacturing businesses. It was amazing. Ariel's feelings for Benito hadn't diminished. In fact, they grew stronger with each passing day. Benito, who appeared calm and even stern on the surface, concealed a kind and attentive nature that no one knew about. She was so lucky to have him. Ariel gradually became an enthusiastic businesswoman herself. She now understood many aspects of the business and handled most issues on her own, without Benito's assistance. She even fulfilled her long-held dream of learning to drive. She obtained her driver's license and bought a new car from a dealership, not a luxurious foreign car, but a reliable and high-quality one. Ariel was a very cautious driver. However, not everything depended on her on the road. There were always reckless drivers and daredevils around. One day, Ariel encountered one of those rule breakers at the crossroad. The incident happened right there. For some reason, the airbag didn't deploy, and Ariel hit her head on the steering wheel. It wasn't anything serious, but it left a cut on her forehead. The ambulance that arrived at the scene took her to the regional hospital to stitch up the wound. Ariel was in the procedure room, pain-free thanks to the anesthesia, while the surgeon worked on her forehead. She didn't feel any pain. Instead, she was thinking about how badly her beloved car was damaged. When the tow truck came to pick up her car, Ariel didn't have a chance to inspect the damage closely, but it was undoubtedly worse than her minor injury. After the surgeon finished, Ariel was taken to her ward. "Can I leave? I feel perfectly fine today." "I have a lot of work to do," Ariel asked. "No," the doctor shook his head. "You'll have to spend the night in the hospital. We need to rule out you don't have a concussion." Ariel felt genuinely bored in her single hospital room. She hadn't planned on being in the hospital, so she hadn't brought a book. She would have at least read something if she had. All she had was her phone. She told her mother that she was staying at a friend's place for the night, not wanting to worry her about the accident. She was accustomed to shielding her loved ones from stress, even though her mother's health wasn't a concern. Ariel was laying on the bed, absent-mindedly scrolling through her news feed when the hospital room door suddenly burst open. Standing in the doorway was Benito, with disheveled hair and a worried look in his eyes. When he saw Ariel, who was looking at him in surprise from her bed, he rushed over and hugged her tightly. "I was so afraid of losing you," he said. Ariel felt a warm wave from head to toe. Benito said this phrase so sincerely, and it meant a lot to her. Wow! She gladly embraced him. She had been dreaming of this for so long. "I was afraid something serious had happened to you," Benito said, slightly pulling away and looking into Ariel's eyes. "I saw photos of your mangled car in the local social media, recognized the license plates. They said the driver was in critical condition. I don't think I could go on without you anymore." "I'm perfectly fine," Ariel smiled. They exaggerated it on purpose to make it more interesting for people to read. "I just have a scratch on my forehead. The doctor put in a couple of stitches, that's all." Benito smiled in response. "Well, it seems there's no point in hiding it anymore. I didn't tell you anything because, well, you seem to be somewhat dependent on me. I didn't want to make things awkward or confusing. I don't even know when I started having feelings for you. Maybe when you told us about your trouble at the pizzeria. Or maybe after that, when we were organizing your mother's treatment. I don't know. But I've never met anyone as sincere, honest, and beautiful as you. Today, when I heard about the accident, I was so afraid I had lost you forever. It was such a fear. I've never felt anything like it before." Ariel smiled. She would find the right words to tell Benito about her feelings, but a little later. Surely, he could see everything in her eyes. After all, Benito was intelligent and had a keen sense of people. "Well, now you find yourself in the same situation as your grandmother once did," Ariel smiled. "Remember, back then at the bus stop, she said that someday you would understand? You would understand how you can get scared for your loved ones. That's exactly what happened." "Well, she's right," Benito's eyes sparkled. "The situation is very similar. Grandma, as always, was right. In everything."
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.